Okay, it is 7:01 a.m., and I am calling the Hamilton
Oh,
Planning
God.
Board meeting to order, September 19th, 2023 meeting. This meeting is being recorded, and accordingly, particularly because we have a member appearing via Zoom, I will take roll call. So when I call your name, would you please indicate that you're present? Pat Norton?
Present, Marnie.
Thank you. Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, present.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, present.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, present.
Beth Herr,
Beth Herr, present.
Rick Mitchell,
Here.
Matt Hamill,
Present.
and Marnie Crouch, present. So on our agenda this evening, the primary focus is the stormwater management general bylaw and the amendments that are being proposed to that bylaw. We also have a discussion of various potential changes to existing bylaws and an update on the Gordon Conwell reuse initiative. And unless any of the planning board members have an objection, I thought I would take the Gordon Conwell reuse initiative as the first item, because I don't think it should delay us. It is merely a status report. We're not going to get involved in any amendments to the draft Browns Hill Overlay District that's on the table now. So I will just give a very brief report so that I don't hold up Dr. Barnes, and I don't know if Merwin Walters is on Zoom either. But at any rate, as you may be aware, the seminary did extend an invitation to representatives of the planning board to tour the campus, and the select board encouraged several members to go and meet with seminary officials, and those officials were Dr. Barnes and Merwin Walters. And there's a typo in our agenda, but Emil, Jonathan, and I did go up to the college on Monday, and we had a very cordial and productive meeting with Dr. Barnes and Merwin Walters. And so the real takeaway from that meeting is that the seminary wants to be engaged, and they're still very much in favor of pursuing an overlay district for the campus. So we exchanged some information. The seminary did have some suggestions to the zoning, the districts that are set forth in the Browns Hill Overlay District map, and we will consider that at another time. They also indicated that they are in the process of preparing a red line version of the Browns Hill Overlay District, and they will have that to us shortly. And they'll also have information about the marketing efforts that Cushman and Wakefield have undertaken. So with all that said, I want to just indicate that our next meeting is on October 3rd, and I think at that point, we will have as our focus completing or working toward, I should say, the completion of the Browns Hill Overlay District. And we can also consider at that time whether we want to form any kind of informal subcommittee that might meet with representatives of the seminary. But I would want to make sure that that is something that the town council would approve, and also what kind of notice would be attached to that type of an informal arrangement. And so again, I'll just reiterate, it was a very productive meeting. It gave us some cause for optimism, and I think that the real focus should be at our next meeting to work toward this completion of the overlay district. Does anyone have any questions or comments with respect to that?
Was there any further clarity about their newfound desire to stay?
Well, I think they want to keep options on the table. And I should add, I meant to say this, at the outset of our meeting, I did indicate to them that the representatives of the planning board were really there to listen, provide any clarifications that they might have, but we were by no means authorized to negotiate anything with respect to the overlay district or the maps that are on the table. That all of that would have to come back for the full board for consideration and any vote if necessary. So clarifications, and Dr. Barnes is here, but he did indicate that one of the options that might be likely is that the seminary would stay on the campus with a much smaller footprint. So that,
All of the campus, or?
no, just a smaller portion, and I'd prefer, Dr. Barnes, if you're there, you could speak for yourself, rather than for me to put words in your mouth.
Yes, Madam Chair, thank you very much. And thank you for the members who came to visit. I concur that it was an extremely productive meeting, and we are, I think, all moving in the right direction. We all want to find a win-win solution here. Yes, it is highly probable that we will remain on a portion of the campus because we need a home to continue to do what we do, and that's why we are engaged in the process. So we look forward to the next meeting, which I think is October 3rd, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that's the
3rd or
date.
3rd, I think it is. And by then you will have the redlined version. We've completed our version of the redlined version, by the way, but we wanted to run it by other counsel who are expert in these things. And also to let you know that we have a meeting this week with the select board and with John Whitten to discuss the development agreement as well. So we're moving full speed ahead, and we sincerely appreciate the incredible work that has been done by the planning board, Emil and Jonathan especially. We've said that all along, but you know, it really is incredible work, and we hope we can find a solution that the town will approve.
Thank you, Dr. Barnes.
Question. Ken, at the August meeting when Scott Sundquist was here, he said by mid-September, that the seminary would be ready to reveal who the bidders were that Cushman Wakefield had brought to the table. Do you anticipate that happening anytime soon?
Well, we expect bids to start coming in at the end of this week. I can't say whether or not anything will be revealed because I don't know what the agreements are with the potential bidders in terms of anonymity and et cetera. But we will have a pretty good idea, I think, certainly by the next time we meet, where the market is leaning. And as we've said all along, we can't make any a priori assumptions about that. We know there's exceptional interest in the apartments, and of course the select board has an interest in the apartments, et cetera, getting on the tax rolls and potentially helping with some of the 40B requirements. And we are confident there'll be interest in the other areas as well. So we just have to wait and see, but it's moving at pace, and that's good for everybody.
Yes, would you?
Hi, I'm Valerie Peck, 37 Miles River Road, a direct abutter to Gordon Conwell. And this is actually directed not only to you all, but to Ken Barnes as well. There's an advertisement put out by Cushman Wakefield, which I believe is what you are speaking to, that shows my house in the boundaries of the sale. I'm a little uncomfortable with that. I don't know where that advertisement is being put out and who's responding, but if it could be at least redrawn so as to not include the house and in the land. It literally, the boundary, I don't know if Ken, if you're aware of this, but anyway, that's the only thing. I'm a little uncomfortable with my house being included in the offering, unless it's a great price, but. So,
Valerie, this is the first I've heard this. My sincere apologies. I'll speak to Cushman Wakefield tomorrow about that.
Excuse me,
I do have the actual picture on my phone with the red outline, including my house.
Valerie, I appreciate your concern, and I think you should speak to the seminary directly with respect to that.
I will, I'll call them.
Something, because our agenda is a
It's not,
status.
I apologize then if that wasn't
Oh, no,
appropriate, but it was a little bit of a concern.
I'm aware of that. I mean,
Okay.
that advertisement is publicly available. I mean,
If I start seeing strangers on the property, I just was going to be concerned, so, thank you.
okay, if there's nothing else on, with respect to that agenda item, I would like to move on to the stormwater management bylaw. And I'm hoping at this time that we're all working from the same document. At our last meeting, we noticed a discrepancy between the red line version and what was closer to a final version of the stormwater management bylaw. And so after that meeting, I went through the document and highlighted some terms and redlined some information that was added. And now we should have that document before us. And Robin, are you here? Robin Stein is filling in for Alex Weshert.
Hi, I'm here, Marty.
Oh, good.
I'm on the Zoom.
Oh, thank you, Robin. So I emailed Robin this morning, and I confirmed with her that KP Law has reviewed this document. And so what you have in front of you is what I hope is the final version of the Stormwater Management General Bylaw with our amendments, and that once we eliminate the highlighting and the redlining, it will be something that we can notice out for public comment as soon as possible. So I would ask, I would observe the following. So there was a somewhat of an issue with respect to the use of the term land disturbance permit and stormwater management permit. So Alex clarified that there should always be a reference to the stormwater management permit. There was only to be, or there only now is, a reference to a land disturbance review. So that was a major kind of just inconsistency in terminology that really had to be cleaned up. And we added some tree cutting and grubbing to some of the definitions. We adjusted the definition of slope. And so I apologize, I should have had page numberings on this, but it's on page 3, the definition of slope. We all happy with that?
Yep.
And then I won't go over the reference to tree cutting and grubbing. We made some other cleanup provisions with respect to square footage on page 4. And then on page 5, with respect to the special permit at Emil's suggestion, we added some other criteria for obtaining a stormwater management permit. And then finally, I think, and most importantly, with respect to the enforcement provisions, that was cleaned up as well. So Chapter 12 enforcement should be in pretty good shape. So any land disturbance activities in excess of the thresholds established in Section 4. So Section 4 establishes the threshold for a land disturbance review, and so there's there's a reference to administrative reform approval. So I think with all that said, I think I could entertain a vote, unless there's some further discussion from members on Zoom or anyone here, to approve all these changes, and we can request that KP Law prepare the article for the warrant, and we can go to press with a more formal notice, which, by the way, is not actually required but advisable, and hopefully we'll get to town meeting, and the voters here in Hamilton will see that these amendments close an existing loophole in the existing general bylaw, and also address what will more frequently happen, that there's development of less than prime land. So we're likely to see in the future more building on steeper slopes and wooded areas. And so these provisions that we've added are proactive to essentially eliminate the possibility of what has happened with respect to the 9 lots on Bridge Street ever happening again. Patrick?
Marnie, I know Mr. Ford has made it to our meeting tonight. If you'd like to take some public comment
I absolutely
regarding
would.
our text.
You're more than welcome to speak. I hope it's positive.
Thank you. Thank you, Patrick, for having me. Good evening, everybody.
Could you state your name, please?
Tom Ford, 609 Bay Road. Tom and Tim have done a number of subdivisions and houses here in Hamilton. Really quickly, I think the bylaw improvements are well thought out and mostly correct. I have a couple of minor adjustments, but I think if the impetus for this is part of the problems that developed on Bridge Street, I think I have a bigger issue that you might want to address.
Yes, please.
I see two very strong pieces to this bylaw, the pre-construction during approvals piece, and then there is an as-built and a final checkoff. But I do believe that what happened on Bridge Street was there was no intermediate administration or expertise in checking that. My brother and I both live in town here, and we bet on how little and how quickly that erosion control would collapse, and we discussed, what are we missing? What does he know that we don't know? And it collapsed mightily, and the DPW got stuck with the cleanup, and I think I might offer my experience in Beverly on a much larger industrial site where part of my approvals required a weekly walk around with a third-party environmental professional to check on erosion controls and the work we were doing to make sure that it was not going to result in a Bridge Street. And it was Mary Remmer, who many of you know, and she was there every week for the most part of a year. I don't think that's appropriate for a single-family home, and I certainly don't think it's appropriate for a house on the flat or a house in gravel. But on a house on the slopes like there were on Bridge Street with that soil type and the groundwater, traveling this far under the loom everywhere, it was apparent to those of us who know what we're doing that it was going to fail. And it's disappointing that, all the energy is going into the permits and the post-closure. There needs to be a very big step in the middle, and it should be proportionate. I don't think it should be the same rule book for a 2-lot subdivision in gravel as it is for, something hanging off the side of the hill that disturbs 10 acres. But I think that piece, although it's not totally missing, and then the next piece, the corollary to that are the
Could I just interrupt you with just
Sure,
and
I'm
I
sorry.
hope you can answer the question. If you had any insight into where in the bylaw that we have, where you might add that requirement?
Well, you have permits and procedures, and then you have a final report. I mean, it seems like
in there?
Yeah, to the, with a hole.
There's a hole.
I-
And that's what we found with respect to Bridge Street, because the clearing was less than an acre. So well, it wasn't actually the owner of the property, but there was an LLC that came in for a stormwater management permit and then saw the light and said, but we didn't clear more than an acre, or we didn't clear an acre or more, ergo, we don't need to apply for this stormwater management permit. They withdrew it, and the planning board then had nothing, no jurisdiction, if you will, to address the issue. It had to fall on other town boards to address it. And the other issue was, even though there was a reference to a common plan of development or sale, there was no definition of that terminology, and no enforcement mechanism if there were to be a finding that a common plan of development or sale existed.
But I believe there was common ownership. Did he take
Oh,
it
there
down?
was, but there was no enforcement mechanism that would specifically apply to this common plan of development or sale. So we were sort of limited to looking at it lot by lot, in the absence of a definition.
Sorry, Marty, maybe I can chime in on Pat Norton on Zoom. Sorry I couldn't be there in person, but the example that was given in a weekly requirement for inspection or an inspection after a significant rainfall, which is defined as part of the NIPD's permit process in a stormwater prevention plan, that will trigger all those requirements that were just described. I think the acre threshold, the common plan of development is defined within the state requirements under the NIPD's permit process. So if this project would have been considered under the state requirements for what they consider, then they might have had a chance. But the permit application process doesn't define the maintenance requirements of a project. It just triggers the application process, which says you have to develop a maintenance plan or a stormwater prevention plan. It doesn't, the bylaw itself shouldn't really quantify or tell you exactly what that is. It just has to give you the requirements that trigger having to develop one of those things. So I think the example given probably was applied to something that was filed under a NIPD's permit with the state, which does require a stormwater prevention plan, which does require weekly inspections and reports filed for weekly inspections. It doesn't really matter who does it, but that has to be done. And then also for any condition after significant rainfall. So the bylaw does allow for that condition to happen. It's just governed by the state requirement or the permit application process.
Pat, would the regulations that we're going to consider next, the rules and regulations, would that have clarification about that? I mean, or could we add that?
I don't think our bylaw specifically has to, because the state addresses it in
Not the bylaw,
their
the rules and
requirements.
regulations.
I'm sorry, I missed it, Marty.
Could the rules and regulations make reference to the state requirements?
Well, it certainly does. It should. I mean, I guess that's where that exactly, if it's above an acre disturbance, that's required. A maintenance plan is required also. We require a maintenance plan under any of the other land disturbance considerations, whether it be the administrative or the major land disturbance, which is the greater than 5,000 square feet, but with the 25% slope. Those do require maintenance plans also, or could.
So that could be a condition, is that what you're saying?
Well, you would check the box on the rules, and like you said, we would have. That's where my comment was going to be back to. Our bylaw is not really too specific. It's like when you look at the application and the requirements for submission, it doesn't differentiate really what you might need in an administrative submission versus like a major land disturbance. I would ask, does the administrative land disturbance permit application require public notice? Does it require a public hearing? It may not. And who is the administrator? Who is the administrator? Is it just Patrick checking the boxes on what they're submitting to make sure it does apply to that, or is it actually going to follow the same onerous process that a major land disturbance would? That would go into the rules and regs. There would certainly be a way to, a document that you could use to differentiate what are the minimum requirements for submission when looking at either or disturbance. But in the bylaw currently, it doesn't really tell you that there's a difference in the submission requirements.
I know in the rules and regulations, they have smaller projects and larger projects.
Sure, yep.
So I guess there are two concerns I have. One is Mr. Ford right that we might have a potential loophole here in our bylaw with respect to monitoring a site if there's a substantial risk of what might happen on Bridge Street that we have failed to address in the bylaw? Or is the appropriate place of dealing with the issue and also referencing the requirements of the state in the rules and regulations? And my recollection, again, is that there are smaller projects and larger projects addressed in the rules and regulations.
Well, I mean, under this proposed bylaw, there would be a plan for each site or for the common group of sites. The plan we would approve would have all sorts of details about what kind of grading and drainage and how the whole construction process
What
was going to
conditions
go.
we could impose.
And, I mean, our problem is we never got a plan because we didn't have jurisdiction. Right? Bridge Street is completely dependent on state rules because our local ordinance was inapplicable because they cleared less than an acre of land. And so we had no local inspection, we had no, the town engineers went up there, but they weren't working off of any stormwater management rules and regulations. They were working off of whatever DPW has. So if this goes into effect, they would have had to have come in with a complete plan. And I mean, I think the only issue here is, ongoing enforcement of the plan as opposed to, I mean, our enforceability issues deal with, well, what if they start construction without a plan, as opposed to they have a plan, how do we ensure, we have to have sort of periodic inspection to make sure that they're abiding by the plan. But once there's a plan, then, they can be, in some sense, fined or construction stopped or whatever if they're not abiding by the plan.
Well, you'll forgive me. but-
Marty,
Sorry.
sorry, this is Robin. Just to jump in, I just wanted to note that in section 5E of the draft, it talks about the planning board's rules and regulations, and talks about the rules and regulations, including items such as the size, quantity, and distribution of plans, filing fee, required details for stormwater management plan, operation and maintenance plan, inspection, and site supervision. So it sounds like that information is contemplated to be within the scope of the bylaw, included in the rules and regulations, the type of information you would need to provide upon application.
What section did you reference? Rob?
5E.
5E.
I-E-E. Yeah, it's at the top of, you're right, we should add page numbers to these when we clean them up. I think it's the 5th page.
I found it.
Sixth page, sorry. Towards the top of the 6th page.
So
Right. It
that
does-
answers your question.
answers the
Rules and
question.
regulations.
And I think, I can't find it right now, but I think one of the things that the planning board can do is condition the permit. So in appropriate circumstances, I believe we could impose maintenance.
Marty, that's in F on the next page. Approve with conditions,
6F2.
maybe 2 big,
Right, right,
yeah.
yes. So do you think that addresses this issue? That we have this ability to impose conditions, and we can demand a maintenance plan, and as one of our conditions, we could require, especially on steep slopes, that there's monitoring by a qualified individual on a weekly basis, or after some amount of
Event.
rainfall.
I would suggest that this board has no trouble having third-party review of my subdivision plan and my drainage calcs and all the rest. I don't, for the life of me, I don't understand why all that review ceases once the plan is approved, because we know that construction is fraught with changes, and sometimes the anticipated ground conditions are not what you expect. And you'll forgive me, but I saw a plan and was asked if I would be interested in buying this piece of land on Bridge Street, and the whole frontage along Bridge Street was shown as a wetland. And that whole wetland has been disturbed and filled in with, I don't know, 8 to 12 inch riprap. So it's extraordinarily confusing to me that you would work so hard to get a plan and have no mechanism to enforce it. And, you know, I'm usually on the other side of this, but that Bridge Street thing is a mess, and it's difficult for those of us who live on Bay Road not to cut down there through Essex and see the muddy water cut, over the crown of the street and into somebody's yard. For the life of me, I don't understand why you'd be averse to having third-party management, particularly for projects of scale. That's 9 lots, it's, what's that, $12 million sellout or something?
Right.
There should definitely be room for $30,000 worth of third-party, or DPW, however you have a mechanism in here to reclaim town money that's spent on that. For the life of me, I can't understand why you'd go from the plan to the as-built and nothing in the middle.
An excellent point. I frankly am a little concerned. I am concerned about this. I think my real question is, does it belong in the general bylaw or in the rules and regulations? And
I mean, there isn't, I mean, presumably the plan as built won't have any problems with it. But I can see during construction that there will be temporary disruptions, housings of, dirt, everything. And during storms, that could create some kind of problem, serious problem, right? But I don't know how we would manage the temporary disruptions on the site. You wouldn't want, that's not going to be part of the long-term plan. So, I mean,
Sorry, the maintenance, so I've recently done a NIPD's permit submission. The stormwater prevention plan does address erosion control during the course of construction. The maintenance plan addresses the long-term maintenance to the systems that get installed as part of the construction project, swales and the rest of the things, to make sure, rain gardens or whatever, that whatever engineering controls got built into the project are maintained through its life. But the stormwater prevention plan does require, and I've had to provide, weekly maintenance, weekly inspection reports and reports after major rainfall, and those reports are made available to the town or any inspection agency that come to site. We have to maintain them. They have to be ready to show whenever anyone comes to site. But that stormwater prevention plan does check that box. The question is, when in the bylaw does it trigger requiring to have a stormwater prevention plan in place? I think is the. And unfortunately, in the case that we keep referring to in the Bridge Street, it didn't trigger any kind of permitting authority that required having a stormwater. They don't have a stormwater prevention plan.
well, couldn't we put in the rules and regulations,
Well, it already says that.
an inspection process for how things are managed during construction?
Well, can I just interject for a moment? I think what the board needs to be careful of is not trying to duplicate or overstep what the state already provides for. What you want to do is you want to make sure there's a trigger that gets you into the state regs and guidelines. And that's the puzzle, not to repeat, duplicate that. So, and the challenge is, I mean, you said so you're...
Does the state send somebody out here every week to check on things?
No.
No, they've got
Third parties.
thousands of projects
No,
around.
but the SWIP does require that. So,
Okay.
so the puzzle is, if you're going to try to be clear about when this, to Pat's point, when you're going to be clear about when the SWIP gets triggered, the trick is, you mentioned yourself, it's not just slope, it's soil types, it's the unique nature of the site. And the trick is to know how to create metrics around that. And maybe what it is it's some provision that allows somebody to make a decision, but the question is who makes the decision, what triggers it, when it triggers the SWIP. And I don't know whether that's the DPW. It certainly shouldn't be the planning board, because there will be many times when there's not the expertise on the planning board. I don't think it should be Patrick. So the puzzle is who is the trigger and what is the trigger? But it should be the state that creates the details for that, I think.
Well, between 0, which is what Bridge Street got, and a NIPD's permit, which is what I had in Beverly, there's a lot of projects, most of the projects, I suspect, are in that interstitial space.
Yep.
And the fact that you show a tracking pad on the conservation and the planning board submission and never construct it, or if you construct it and it degrades and is never replaced, I can't see how that is less important than a good as-built, to be honest. I don't want to be too repetitive here, but the problems on Bridge Street are apparent, and I think the problem is not about a more detailed plan, but rather more detailed enforcement of the plan that's approved.
Yeah, so I think the board agrees with your point, and the question just is where to put the trigger. So I don't think anybody disagrees with your point. I think it's a great point.
Oh, yeah.
And it's really just figuring out where we put that trigger and make sure we don't accidentally intercept what the state would do better than us. That's all.
Does
Well,
Robin have,
To this gentleman's point, as soon as it hits a NIPD's permit, take a giant step backwards because it's all covered.
Right.
That's where I was.
Right.
But that doesn't happen often in Hamilton, to
Yep.
be honest. I don't think it ever has, to be honest. Maybe on the Hill. But in the middle between a single lot and the NIPD's permit, there's a lot of room for mistakes.
Yeah, so my second question really is around who would make the decision of when you've met the threshold. So somebody needs to make that decision, and it's hard to put in words in the bylaw and make it cover all the, I think it's, am I making any sense?
Yeah, I think you are. I think you're absolutely right. There seems to be a gap there, but a correlation is in construction, which you would be familiar with, where actually the building is at its weakest point during construction. It's not before, obviously, because nothing been done. And afterwards, all the numbers have to comply with rules and regulations and codes and so forth. It's during construction when it's really a hazard, when you're going to have something placed incorrectly, temporarily, and before it's shored up, or everything is put together so it's a three-dimensional, structure. And there, the inspection is actually done by an engineer, or it's done by,
Building official. Yeah. But it's not waiting until the end. It's
No,
show me before
Yeah.
you pour the footing.
Yeah.
Show me after you pour the
Yeah.
footing.
I think
Show
we
me-
all agree with that. We all agree with
Right.
that. And the question is just how to do it.
it's how to do it, yeah.
So why not reference that in the regulations and mirror the state requirements?
Well, the point here, I think, that Tom is making is that the state requirements maybe they don't come early enough, and we might want to have something come a little bit earlier.
That's why I'm saying put them in the rules and.
Right, and then again, the question is how to create that metric, and then who is the judge of that metric?
Right, because what he's
The devil's in the
saying,
details.
Well, I
what
think,
he's saying is there are a lot of projects that wouldn't trigger a SWIP.
Yes,
They
that's,
still require
I hear it, I agree with
And
it.
so,
I agree with all of this. The
Right.
devil's in the details.
right, the
So-
devil's in the
so-
details.
if a administrative review is triggered, then it would require the applicant to fund a independent third-party engineer to conduct ongoing.
Yeah, I think that's right.
Maintenance.
The onus is on the
And maybe the engineer should be the
contractor,
one.
actually, in this case, because it's the same again in construction, that the owner who is doing the project is responsible for it, so he would be the one to do
This
the
is
monitoring,
exactly what we did,
to get it to the end condition.
right.
And you have no trouble with exercising that discretion to review my plans. Why don't you leave the box open and say, the planning board reserves the right to require third-party monthly or biweekly inspection should the soil type and topography.
Yeah, you're right, it's not in every condition, but it's
Right,
in
yeah,
particular
you need the
conditions.
discretion.
That's where I was going to go next, is it has to be at the discretion of the planning board, and then the issue is, you really need, especially given, planning board makeup would change at various times, and there might not always be folks who are have the expertise in that. We might need some other mechanism where somebody can look at it and determine that, like maybe it's the DPW or something like that. The planning board can confer with the DPW and see if that a third party is required.
No,
Right,
I
right.
think,
discretion.
I think you want to make that as you stipulate a third party is required. You don't want to ask the DPW. The DPW is overstretched as it is, and you want an independent.
Well, the trick is to know when that is justified. That's the trouble. Is where and what is the threshold?
Yeah, but what I'm saying is, within the rules, when administrative, I forget what we call it,
And disturbance review.
administrative land disturbance review is triggered, the applicant will be required to fund an independent engineer to review proposed plans and determine if there is based on soil type and conditions, a ongoing construction,
Yeah,
maintenance,
that nails it.
and
Yes.
inspection process.
Yep.
Right, so
Yep.
here's my solution.
He almost has the wording there.
Right.
Yeah.
Construction management plan?
Yeah.
What I would suggest is in section 5E, it's referencing planning board rules and regulations. And Pat, Robin, and maybe Alex can weigh in on this as well. So in section 5E, where it references planning board rules and regulations, the language reads, "The rules and regulations shall include, but shall not be limited to." And here's where I would add a language with respect to oversight of maintenance of
Construction.
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 And
But it begins with at the discretion of the planning board.
right, and
Yes.
just add
Yes.
language here.
Yep.
And then in the rules and regulations, we can formulate the trigger for when the oversight would be required and who would pay for it. So I think that what you're suggesting, and everyone on this board agrees with you 100%. It's like this, what you brought up is really great, because it was essentially pointing out a loophole. And the loophole is what prompted us to review the bylaw in the first place. So finding another loophole is,
So it would fit in here. The question to Robin would be, does it belong in here? Does it belong in the regs?
I think it should reference it
So
here.
if I
so-
could
Wait a minute, let Rob.
point out to you, it's just your existing regulations, and I imagine your updated regulations will be similar with changes to accommodate the new bylaw, already has in section 7B that the board can do technical review, including using chapter 44, section 53G, which is the peer review count statute. So it's in the existing regulations. I think what you're talking about as far as conditioning is going to be application specific, right? Some applications are going to require different conditions and different kinds of follow-up, but it is in your current regulations. And I imagine the new regulations are going to be similar, just with some revisions, correct?
Well, they're going to incorporate the amendments to this bylaw. We haven't tackled that yet.
Yes, but it's in there. So it's in 7B of your existing, the 2021 update that you did to the regulations.
So a question would be,
7B.
a question then would be, would it help reinforce it if we also inserted it in 5E in the bylaw?
Sure, but in 5E, I think because again, there's a difference between upfront permit requirements that the regulations will require and the bylaw empowering the board to condition projects, right? Because one is, what do we need to do up front? What do we have the authority to do to properly review the plans? And the other is, once we've done that review, what are the proper safeguards we can put on to accomplish the goals of the bylaw? And so if you're going to put it in 5E, then I think you can, if you want to add to the list of things in 5E, that's great. You can say the rules and regulations shall include but not be limited to the size, quantity, distribution of plans, the filing fee. Now, it is in the filing fee section of the regulations, but you could just say peer review. Just add the phrase peer review, and then it'll be clear that the board may need to use consultants.
Or why not just refer to that section of the existing regulations that we already have adopted? Just say the permit.
It does, because it says filing fees, and that's where it is in the existing regulations. But it doesn't hurt to specifically add it if you want it to be really clear.
We don't care. I mean, if we just reference that section of the bylaw that gives us the authority to impose a filing fee, which they should, and a third-party review, it's already there, is what I'm hearing you tell me, Robin.
Well, it's there in the sense that it says filing fees, and then it's in the filing fee section of your regulations, but I don't think it hurts to just add the words peer review and make it clear to folks.
So extract the language and insert it.
And if you'll forgive me, what if you had somebody like Tom up here pitching you, I'm taking down a house and I'm building 2 duplexes on a flat piece of land, and I made a compelling argument that we didn't need monthly, walkthroughs. You should have the discretion to say, been there, that's fine. You know what I mean? I would keep the discretion to either ramp it up or ramp it down. And in the event of an incident, we reserve the right to go from monthly to weekly. Keep the discretion that you're entitled to, I think.
Oh, absolutely, and I think that's understood. And I think from my point of view, is that the rules and regulations can elaborate on what's required. Now, I wouldn't necessarily reference a particular rule and regulation because they can change.
Right.
But you could reference the
Just extract
state
them.
law or whatever. So I actually always like to see specifics set forth, because then no one can say, I didn't know. I didn't see that. I didn't see that language. I didn't know that weekly maintenance might be required. So if you have something in there, it's patent. They can't, that argument won't fly. So, Robin, maybe we can work on this language, where you would add peer review. But I actually really like to see a reference to some type of oversight during construction.
So again, you have the ability in the bylaw to condition projects, and that would be a project condition, but I think it would be difficult to build specifics into the bylaw because every project's going to be different, right? But if you go back to section, I think it was 7(2), you can approve the stormwater management permit application and issue a permit with conditions, modifications, or restrictions that the permit authority determines are required to ensure that the project will protect water resources and meet the objectives and requirements of the bylaw. So it gives you broad discretion to have reasonable conditions. And inspections during construction may be one of them in certain projects, may not be in others. You'll have that ability to use your discretion.
Does that satisfy everyone?
That does it for me.
Yes. And I agree with Robin that if you're overly specific, it creates the possibility for additional loopholes. It's better to keep it general. I would agree with her
Okay.
as a practical matter.
Right, but the rules and regulations can elaborate on this, and we can.
Yeah, you just want to also be careful you don't over specify, because then you think that the thing you forget becomes the loophole. So anyway,
Yeah.
I don't want to get lost on that.
No,
Let's not get lost on that. We'll get there when we get there.
understand. I guess
We'll get there when we get there.
Yeah. Okay, does that,
It's all fine with me, and it's probably, if I put on my developer hat, it's probably easier if you didn't touch it. But I do believe that was the hole that allowed Bridge Street to become such a mess, coupled with an inexperienced team. But no, that's a good change, I think. Two little baby things, because I'm overstaying my welcome. On 4B, administrative land disturbance review is required for projects that result in a disturbance of between 5,000 square feet. And this number confuses me, 43,559. Does that mean if I do a project of 43,579, I don't need an administrative land disturbance review?
then I think
Triggers the stormwater
it
management.
becomes over an acre, and
It becomes, then it triggers the state's
Stormwater
stormwater
management.
management review.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay, but that should be 43,560, I think, but is it? I don't know. Yeah.
Alex said make it 1 foot
One
under
less.
it,
Oh, yeah,
Yeah.
on
One-
purpose, all right.
and then
all
it
right.
flips
1 square
over.
foot.
My bad. And the other thing that I would add in your definition is the Soil Conservation Act has a very nice, but somewhat general, map of all the soil types here and everywhere else. And if you had the soil types enumerated on your submissions, I think you'd have a very good idea on the way in whether you were going to have problems. And I think they should be asked for inside of your
Yeah.
initial submission.
I think that's a very good
Yep.
comment.
Yep.
That's a very good comment to make. Yeah. Soil types, maybe, Pat?
Yeah, no, that's good. I was gonna ask Mr. Ford, the trigger for the minimum requirement trigger, are you concerned at all with the 5,000? Because I just was thinking, I did some takeoffs on if you take in consideration the disturbance to include a driveway, a garage, a house, a septic, pretty much almost every single family home construction would trigger at least an administrative review. Is that your assessment as well, or do you have any kind of concern with how that might be received?
You're going to wrap it all in. I just didn't know why it quit at just under an acre now that I know it moves into another different box, that's all.
I guess, I mean, for the minimum trigger. So I've looked at other bylaws, and some of them are 20,000, some of them are even less than 5, but I guess we came about at 5, but considering 5 again, I think every single family home will disturb over 5,000 square feet of land, which would require every single new development to at least go through an administrative
I know.
review process.
Truthfully, I think that our bylaws are strong enough, but the thing that happened on Bridge Street needs to be corrected, and I'm excited that you went after that with seriousness, but I do believe it wasn't about the approvals, it was about the whole, and then I would love to see that somebody went after those people at the end of the day, because what they did to the wetlands is confusing and should be replicated somewhere in town, because they took a bunch of wetlands and just filled it in with stone, and Tim and I had tried to do that, I think we'd be in cuffs.
Okay, so maybe parroting that back to the board, are we concerned at all with the
About the
5,000 square feet, considering,
no, but what about the definition of soil types? Where were we going to address that issue? In the definitions?
That then also has to appear in applicability. Maybe we got to research that a little. That's where it should be too. if you're going to make a definition of what, refer to as specific soil type, and there are charts.
I'm not presupposing that you outlaw soil types. I'm just saying that.
No, I know that.
They should
No,
be
they should be in there.
Yeah,
No,
they should be on the plot plans.
It is,
Yeah,
it
yeah,
is, yeah. That is good comment.
Anyway, thanks again, Patrick, for the invite. I hope I didn't overstay my welcome, but thank you all.
Thank you for your
Thank you very
feedback.
much.
So I guess, is my point clear with the board? For every single
Yeah,
new family home development, they're going to trigger this
I think you
bylaw,
have
we're
a
gonna
point.
go
So
through-
you're arguing to change the 5,000 to like a quarter acre or something?
I don't know if I guess I don't know what the sweet spot is, but I just did, for a few homes that have been recent, I think every single family home will trigger this.
Yeah. but
So I would
basically,
consider
because the footprint's
increasing
going to be.
the threshold of that's 5,000 to
35,
10,000 or something like that, but.
Septic system is pretty large.
Well, let me flip that on its head for a minute. We've been talking about the fact that much of the flat land is used up, and many of the building sites, if it's new construction, are not ideal sites. And it doesn't hurt to look at it. It doesn't take much of a slope or or an unusual site condition to create a problem. It doesn't mean that we need to make folks jump through hoops, but it doesn't hurt to look at it. And as long as it doesn't become a burden, which I don't think it would be, on the workload of the planning board, I don't think it's a bad thing. There's the flip side of the argument.
Give you some language.
I'm open for debate.
Yep.
How many are we talking?
My understanding is, all the administrative review does is determine whether or not you have to file a permit. It still is the same 5,000 foot, but you have to file a permit if you start to have steep slopes and so on. And it's not much work to come in and say, hi, I'm building on flat land, I don't need a permit. As opposed to, this is gently sloping, is this going to trigger the requirement for a permit or not? And then Patrick looks at the maps and says yes or no.
Yeah.
I don't think that's that much work, actually.
No, in other towns use that same metric.
I'm in favor of it if the administrative process is what was just described, what Bill just described. But if the administrative process could also mean that it's a public hearing, it's a, you know what I mean? If we define the administrative process to be that easy and that simple.
Won't that
I
be
think
in
it's
rules
good.
and regs, or not? What is the administrative process?
Yeah, that would be in the rules and.
That would be in the rules and regs.
Yep.
And
I just want to make sure, because I'll be hopefully helping to develop the rules and regs, and if I can describe the administrative, if everyone agrees that is the administrative process, I'd be happy.
Oh, the administrative process shouldn't trigger a public hearing. I mean, that's ludicrous. I mean, really, it's just, as Bill said, it's do I have to file a stormwater management permit application or not? And
Yep.
do you agree? I mean, in the
Yes.
rules and regulations, we
Yep.
would address that.
And, and you could be more specific about that.
Yeah.
Yep.
Perfect. That's
So,
good.
so let's talk about the logistics of this. When do we have to have it to the town, a final bylaw?
October 19th,
Oh, okay, so we can approve this the second
yes.
But then we have to have
public
that
hearing.
14 days.
If, Robin, let me ask you a question. If we make any modifications to this after we notice it out, is that an issue? I mean, the public notice is not actually required, it's just advisable. So we could actually notice this out and then could we tweak some language with respect to soil types after it was noticed?
Yeah, so because this is a general bylaw, not a zoning bylaw, there's no legal requirement of having a public hearing at all. It's great that you're gonna have one and advertise to folks to come in and talk about it, but I don't see any reason why this can't, evolve. It's just that by the time you have that public hearing, you wanna be settled on the version folks are offering comments on. And ideally, the version that goes in the warrant will be the final version the planning board is recommending, so that you're not modifying things by motion at town meeting.
Right, what I'm thinking is that it perhaps, the version that gets noticed out is slightly modified. Of course, it's my intention to have a final version that goes, on the warrant, with the warrant. But we might have to just tweak it a bit after it gets noticed out. Because we would have to notice it out immediately after this meeting to make sure that we get the October 19th date. So I guess,
But when does it have to go to the select board for inclusion in the warrant?
October 19th.
The same day you're having the hearing?
No, we're not, we have another,
October 3rd.
October 3rd, we could have a hearing.
Sorry, I thought you said it was, okay. Sorry, I thought
If we
someone
have a
said the hearing was then.
14-day
Okay.
notice, it might have to be, what's our next date after October 3rd? Do you have that handy, Patrick? I had it somewhere.
Well, it would have to be no later than the 5th. 14 days and 5 is 19.
We have a hearing on October 17th.
Too late. I thought you said you had to have it to them by the 19th.
Right. The 17th is before the 19th.
Okay, as long as it's in the final version, I guess.
Well, that's what, the final version, we have to have a final version by October 19th. We could notice out a version, say, for example, this version, and then just tweak it with respect to soil types, and consider that on the 17th.
Yeah.
Yep. So, right after the 2nd, when we all approve the final version, we can notice it.
We can actually notice it now
That's fine.
and
Whatever.
just add something with respect to soil types. Is that correct, Robin? So if we considered this on the 17th and had the language with respect to soil types and have that available for people to review prior to the hearing, even if it was slightly different than what was published, it would be okay.
Yes, because first of all, you don't have to have a public hearing, so the rules are a little different since you don't have to have one than, say, for a zoning bylaw amendment. However, I think it's fine, this is pretty much done, everyone's pretty much on board with it, to go ahead and notice that out, get the public hearing set up so folks have time to get it on their calendars, and then, you're not going to agree as a board to any changes outside a public meeting anyway. So you can come the 17th and say, this is something we think we want to add, and you'll discuss it through the public hearing. The important thing is that by the 17th, the board take a vote as to what it's recommending be included in the warrant, so that a final version goes to the select board.
By the
Oh, no,
19th.
Yeah, right.
Correct.
Okay.
Yes.
So maybe we can look into this business of soil type. We can try and get some language on the 3rd, and then we'll be all set.
Yeah.
I mean, do we agree with Mr. Ford that this is something that we should put in?
Strongly.
Yeah.
Yeah, so-
I've seen it in other codes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So, Jonathan, maybe you and Patrick can, Pat Norton, can kind of see where this might all fit in. Do you have an idea where it would go? The soil types, a definition, and then in.
It has to go in applicability as well.
Yes,
then,
and
yeah.
applicability as
Yeah,
well.
yeah. The definition and applicability, I think,
Right.
go the two.
So
I
my,
can communicate with Pat Norton.
yeah.
Yeah.
So everyone remembers the example I had in one of the memos about what happened in Kilbuck Township? That was soil types. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah.
Robin, just so you know, in Kilbuck Township, which is outside of Pittsburgh, Walmart planned to develop land on a very steep slope above Route 60 and the railroad tracks that go through Pittsburgh to Conway, which is a major switching yard. And during construction, the entire hillside collapsed, blocked Route 60 and spilled over the railroad tracks into the Ohio River. And it was deemed a national security threat because of the cessation of railroad traffic into Conway. So that's an example of soil types that shouldn't, that were really dangerous, and there should never have been a permit to construct this Walmart, and I can report it was never built. So, okay, so two important, but hopefully relatively minor changes, right?
Yeah.
Okay. So, does anyone have anything else to add with respect to this stormwater management bylaw?
I prepared a notice for public hearing, and Robin was able to help me edit it
Okay.
this afternoon, so I can get this advertised pretty quickly.
Right, that's great. That's great.
I did just a quick question about the timing around the rules and regs. Would you want those to coincide with, or just follow the warrant, or is it something we do after the fact? What would you recommend?
I think we can amend the rules and regulations after the fact. I don't
Yes.
think there's any requirement that they get done. Certainly, we can report at town meeting that our next step is to look at the rules and regulations again and amend them to incorporate all the changes that have been made to the general bylaw.
Okay.
But the amendments to the rules and regulations require public notice. I'm right on that.
Yes.
So they'll all be noticed out. But, I mean, we need to take our time with them as well, and I don't think we have on our schedule sufficient time to even think about the rules and regulations in a comprehensive and cogent manner before town meeting.
Nor would you, because you don't know if the bylaw is going to pass.
Good point, Rick. I'm certainly hoping it will.
Right, cart before the horse.
Right. Be unfortunate that, but I mean, I think it bodes well that if a developer like Mr. Ford is urging us to make the bylaw more stringent, then it will be hopefully warmly received at town meeting. Any other comments, thoughts, discussion on this point, this item on the agenda? Patrick, do you have any information on what is transpiring on Bridge Street? I mean, I went down there the other day and it looked like they now have some plastic sheeting up on one of the properties and they've paved some of the driveways.
There are a number of things that are actually going on. The Conservation Commission had the developer and the developer's drainage expert at their meeting last Wednesday night. They have a list of things that they're undertaking right now. Roof drains into on-site French drains. They've got some small detention ponds on the individual lots that are being constructed. They're starting to pave the entry onto the lots that are being worked on. One of the discoveries that's been made is that, and you know, I say this a bit guardedly, it's coming from other properties up gradient. And that has made for a significant impact on these 9 lots, and certainly public property as well as private property on the northerly side of Bridge Street. So some things are going to be worked out there in time by others. As I'd mentioned, the Conservation Commission have 3 enforcement orders that they're still pushing on. The developer has done a number of improvements. Some of them I've mentioned. They've been trying to clean out the swale at the bottom of their lots. They have been using, on the finished lots, something called tackifier. And I'll make an analogy. It's sort of like Aquanet hairspray, because they spray it on the soil and it holds it fairly firm. So that's being undertaken on the lots that are as they get finished, and one of them is right now. There are other things that the CONSCOM is concerned about, and they have asked the developer to provide them with information on the level of sedimentation that's taken place into the river. Because there was a measurement taken back in March, and he's been asked to provide another measurement just to have a better understanding of, okay, what's happened since that time. You know,
Patrick, does the town plan on, revamping the whole drainage line on that side of this Bridge Street, and the drain line that goes down to the Miles River near the down ramp from Gordon Conwell? I mean, are they going to revamp that at all, or they think it's adequate? And at whose expense?
The town manager has, as of a week ago, hired a drainage engineer to provide some expertise regarding, okay, what's good, bad, and ugly? What is the developer doing that is wrong or incomplete, or what should be occurring additionally? That information is also going to the Conservation Commission too. I know the town manager wants to meet with the property owners that are on the downhill side of Bridge Street through that stretch, and advise them, address some of their concerns. I don't know if that underground culvert is going to be rebuilt or not. I do think the developer intends to tap into it. I do know that the DPW director isn't so sure that's going to happen, and that there needs to be a meeting of the minds there, and that hasn't occurred yet.
So,
The problems extend all the way to the fact that there's a minimal crown in the road all the way down to Miles River. So what happens in a heavy rainstorm right now is I believe the water can cross Miles River, Bridge Street. It can cross Bridge Street up to 4 times back and forth because there's a minimal crown.
Yeah, there's a minimal crown, and it's deceptive as you look on Bridge Street where water is going to be and where it's going to go to. It was constructed in a manner that, to your point, didn't push the water in the direction where you think it should go.
Right.
And I know that given the fact that we've effectively had 20 inches of rain in the last 6 weeks, I think pre-existing conditions have exacerbated impacts in a huge way. I also think that areas that were thought to be, and are thought currently to be wetlands, are as a consequence of water that's coming from the seminary. And as I say, that is going to be dealt with between the private parties. I'm going to stay 100 miles away from that. So there are a lot of things that are taking place right now. I do know that the developer has been working in good faith. He's spent an inordinate amount of site improvement money that is greatly exceeding what they ever imagined. They've been cleaning out the swale constantly, but given the fact that a lot of the soil on that slope is basically powder, it is, and that makes that, evaluation and understanding of soil types as part of what we're doing really important. And this is certainly a case in point where having had the benefit of that information earlier certainly would have been helpful. But, like I say, there are a lot of things at play right now that need to be worked out. I know that the Conservation Commission is very concerned, and they're going to continue to have Mr. Murphy before them, as well as his drainage expert, probably at every meeting until things get finished.
Are those properties within the Wellhead Protection District as well?
The important, I believe they are, but an important understanding about that wellhead is that the state has eliminated and the town has eliminated our use of that well. And the fact that we've eliminated our use of that well because the water's quality was not what it should be, and it required an extensive amount of refinement and treatment in the plant. That's been offline and will continue to not be a source.
But should they have even been allowed to build there at all until that Wellhead Protection District was basically eliminated? I mean, that's a tough question. It's like,
Yeah, that's an important question that, we haven't answered.
because, I mean, arguably, you could withhold an occupancy permit until such time. I mean, that's a lot of leverage over them, to potential leverage, to get them to reimburse the town for some of the expenses the town has incurred.
Yeah.
So, at any rate, any further comments about our stormwater management bylaw?
They're a little older and wiser.
Well, Pat, and I wish Alex was here, I want to thank them for their work in getting this bylaw in the condition that it's in, but I think that all the board members have made contributions to its betterment, and Mr. Ford certainly raised some excellent points. So we'll add those, the definition and another applicability provision, and I think then we're in really good shape. And I don't know if, Robin, maybe you can advise us. I don't think that we have to vote on this now. I think we can wait until we actually have the absolute final language, and then the warrant article and whatnot, and we can then vote on the 17th to transmit
Yeah, I
that to
think-
the town manager.
I mean, I don't think we need a formal vote today. I think you have enough consensus that, you're going to move forward and notice the public hearing, and then the vote will be what to send to the select board.
Okay. Sounds good. So I think now we can turn to the next item on our agenda, which is the consideration of potential changes to the Hamilton bylaw. And I think I have a couple questions for Patrick. I will report that I sent an email to Jamie Knudsen, who is now chair of the Affordable Housing Trust. And as you may recall, we were stymied by two provisions of the inclusionary housing bylaw, and Robin was mandated to give us her excellent opinion as to their interpretation. But the Affordable Housing Trust, when I was chair, was tasked with making some proposed revisions to the inclusionary housing bylaw and then transmit them to the planning board so that we could review them and perhaps incorporate them as amendments to that bylaw 8.3 at the Springtown meeting. But I did not hear from Jamie, so I'll have to report to you at a later time as to what he has to say. And Patrick, what's the status of this MBTA communities? Where are we on that?
I have,
Excuse me, one second. Marty, do you need me to hang on, or can I take my leave for the evening?
Don't, Robin, but thank you for helping us out tonight.
Okay, I'll see everyone later. Thank you.
thank
Okay,
you, Robin.
bye.
All right, bye.
I have gotten the report from the consultant, which I'm proofing right now. There's some things that I want them to respond to. Once they do, I'll get that back and out publicly, and certainly to the planning board. There's a lot here, and I have to say I'm somewhat galled at the level of interjection the state feels appropriate to inflict on communities like ours. But
What's the
that
carrot and what's the
$3
stick?
will get you a cup of coffee.
There is
Some
no
places.
carrot.
There's no carrot.
No, there's a stick, but no
What's
carrot.
the, well,
The
what's
carrot
the
was
stick?
that there's certain monies that are,
No, that's the stick.
The stick is you don't get certain monies.
so my understanding, I had some people very concerned about this, so I've been in the background. I went to an MAPC meeting in March, and then someone invited me to listen to somebody who was on maybe the Milton Planning Board. And they were saying, and I'm not up to speed because we haven't talked about it, but there are several, I know there's at least one lawsuit. There was a lawsuit in Rockport.
Yes.
I don't know the status, I can get that. And then I know there's several towns that are not complying or have not submitted, and I can find out more on the details. And then the other thing is, the actual law that was in the omnibus bill was just 2 sentences, and it was a district of reasonable size. So it was not 700 and whatever. And there's some questions as to whether they actually have the regulatory power to institute the guidelines. So I'm just giving you feedback based on different people, like, concerned and asking me to listen in on different things. So I'm happy to do a little more research and kind of come back with info on what other towns are doing, if that's helpful. I don't know. I just, when you said that about, like, because we have to pass, my understanding is we have to pass a bylaw.
Yes. I mean,
And if we can't pass a bylaw because the people in the town aren't for it, how does that work?
All right, so
The
can we-
thing here is that, as I understand it, communities have to pursue an attempt to have that zoning approved and locally adopted. it doesn't say that the communities have to accept it, but it has to
So we have to put a bylaw
It has to
together.
go to town meeting.
Got it, okay, that's what I was
So,
trying
so
to.
so my question, so what's the consultant doing?
The consultant has prepared a report based on our zoning, based on the land area that I've been describing to the board, which would include all of the downtown business district, would include the Winthrop School, would include some land area that pushes out basically to Union Street.
Right, it's 500 feet.
So-
It's a 500-foot circle from the train station.
Well,
right?
it's the
It's a half a mile,
500
isn't
circle,
it?
but you don't have to have all of that circle. You do have to have, and the state has some formula that has us at
20% has to be within
at
the,
48 acres, not 50. Why we got that shaved off, I don't know, but we'll take it. But in any event, we're supposed to be providing the ability within this density area to allow for 739
31, I
units.
just looked it up.
Yeah,
731, 49 on the minimum land.
acres, right.
Yep, and then 20% has to be within that train station. 20% of that 721 have to be within the train station.
Which means that we could have had a district, Gordon Conwell, meaning 80%.
Oh, the other
Could
percent.
have been elsewhere. However, given the complexity and the difficulty of what the board was embarking on in trying to make things work with the college, I thought introducing, imposing that
That's just,
zoning onto it
Yeah.
was
Let's
probably
not.
not the right thing to do. And the town manager agreed with me, so I took my idea and I buried it.
So what's the intent of the consultant's report?
The intent of the consultant's report is to provide us with the proposal to the state that allows us to be compliant. It also has a chapter in it which has a draft zoning bylaw that follows the state dictates, and I need to tinker with it to make sure that it follows our physical land area that makes it workable within those three areas that I'd mentioned. One of the biggest things we need to do once we get this cleaned up and sort of rational is we need to make it publicly available to people.
So do we have, at some point, the Attorney General was saber rattling and saying, this is not it's not a, what's the word, voluntary? It's a requirement. Has anybody clarified, have we gotten any clarification for the Attorney General as to whether they think that they're going to be enforcing this?
I don't know the answer to that. However, I do know that John Whitten has been advising other communities regarding attaining compliance.
And what's that advice?
And he's told me also, as I've asked him, the state doesn't have an ultimate punishment for those communities that have tried, but it's been voted down.
Other than withholding grant funds?
Not even that.
So
Oh.
what,
So,
You
well, that-
have to try, you have to put it on the book,
Okay.
the attempt together, and we are currently
In compliance.
compliance.
Yeah.
Right.
And we have until 12/31/24 to make that attempt, right?
That's correct.
Okay. The reason I'm so keenly interested in this is because MassWorks is one of the pots of money that they were threatening to withhold if you did not adopt this. And that HDC contributed $100,000 and got the town to contribute $100,000 to hire Boston Consulting Group to do the engineering and pre-design to submit a $5 million grant request to rebuild all the roads in the downtown, up including Bay Road, Asbury to Willow, Willow to Railroad, Willow to Linden, Railroad to Bay Road from the town line to the pool. So I'm keenly interested in how this is going to play out. It's a $400 million pot of money that all the cities and towns glom onto to do these kinds of projects. So I just want to.
I was under the impression that MBTA ridership is still almost half what it was pre-COVID, that it's bounced back, and that the state legislature is still debating how to make up the huge deficits.
Well,
And so is this the,
That's a side-
is this
but
the state's
Well, no,
way?
I think this was before that.
That's disconnected.
They passed it before it, okay.
Yeah,
okay.
That's
That's not
so.
the equation.
So this gets to Marnie's sort of discussion about kind of bylaws that we might be thinking about. So one of the things we could be doing is, in advance of this, is doing a form-based code for the Winthrop school site and start it now, or start getting funding approved in the next, not this fall town meeting, but the spring town meeting, so that we have a plan in place while we're still figuring out what we're doing with the MBTA, that hopefully would be more attractive to both the residents of the town and potential developers, other than, 731 units on 48 acres in the downtown, which is not feasible since we don't have a wastewater treatment plant.
Right, and could I just ask you, Patrick, was the consultants charged to evaluate in any way, shape, or form the capacity of the land within that radius to actually handle wastewater from, let's just say, 750, for lack of...
Right, that was,
The state, in my opinion, has been irresponsible about that aspect.
Yeah, no carrot.
And they don't care. They envision the developer, the private developer, bearing the expense of dealing with all of that. They also envision the local communities dealing with some level of infrastructural demand, which, as I have been asked over the last few years to review this piece of legislation, which became law, I thought, and I still think it's irresponsible, because they would have a greater level of success if they worked with communities rather than force-fed communities, because we know where we can better accommodate growth. We also know that our lots in downtown are minuscule. We know that they typically don't have the ability to deal with septic and runoff and detention and all of these other things that ordinary development demands. Yes, we have a train station, but the rest of the infrastructural puzzle is non-present.
Well,
We've got a
just-
one-lane highway coming each direction.
Right.
So the idea of us having the ability to accommodate 700 and
31.
31 units in addition with what we have, I just think is wholly irresponsible.
Well, and then
It's-
Wenham also had 365, even though we basically, so now between the two, it's 1,096 instead of, yeah. So if we were one town, we would have 750, but because we're two, now we're almost at 1,100 units in that area downtown. So they also have 346 that are supposed to be 20%.
So in terms of the impact on the infrastructure, it's 1,100, not 700.
Right,
Correct.
right. And-
Really, because, yeah,
And the intersection of Asbury and Bay Road,
yeah.
I mean, the last thing you need to do is spend money repaving that, because that intersection now is,
Well, that-
if you
that-
put that many units.
That includes traffic calming and safety upgrades to that.
Right, but still, I mean, the volume of traffic would be
Oh, yeah,
so
no, it would be
exponential
insane.
as,
Yeah, no, I,
And I just want, on the MAPC meeting I went to in March, basically, a whole bunch of questions came up, and I'll have to look back at my notes, but one of the questions that came up was the carrot and the stick situation, and basically, they said, we have a new administration coming in, so we don't know if there's gonna be changes. But if there were gonna be changes, my sense was they were gonna be more negative changes on a town that didn't comply versus, so I just am sharing that that's what the MAPC said.
There has been no backing off of this law by the new administration. And
Right.
to Rick's point, the three sticks that they have over our head is an unwillingness to provide for MassWorks grants, which are really valuable and workable for entities like the HDC. They also have a provision to preclude funds that go to local housing authorities, which to me boggles the mind, because these are the entities that create and manage and provide affordable housing. So why would you punish them? That to me is just bizarrely antithetical. And then there's a local funds program at the state that gets used for housing and pet projects.
So one other thing that this gentleman, I think he's also an attorney, and I think John Whitten is working with some towns that are pushing back on this. I could be wrong, but you could ask him on that, because I feel like his name might have come up. They also said the home rule allows each municipality to control, it's supposed to allow each municipality to control its own zoning. So for the state to come in, it's violating the home rule. I don't know enough to say whether that's true or not. I'm just telling you some of the like little notes that I took, so I
it
don't know.
might be very interesting to have John Whitten give us a much broader view as to what other towns are doing and whether or not towns are joining together, you know, to share the cost of any type of litigation. But that's an interesting point
And there,
about
I
the
think
home rule.
Burlington, I can find out what towns were pushing back. I'm happy to do a little more research, because I had that at one
At
point.
some point, somebody will ask, how many total dollars spread over how many total years are we eligible to lose?
Yeah.
Right? So if this is,
Right.
you know, how big is this pot? It's, I mean, and this is one, is this a fixed allocation that's going to be spread out over 10 years that we won't get? Because it may come to push and shove, and people say, well, is it really worth destroying the town for $300,000 of grants?
Right,
Right, well,
that's
then,
the
with the
exact
infrastructure
calculus.
costs that you might have to have. The other thing, I mean, personally, I'm like, we have all this empty commercial real estate in Boston, so I'm like, why don't we just house people in Boston without trying to push this MBTA thing? I think, and that's only because of COVID, so I mean, I feel like there might be other solutions that they haven't thought of, but anyways, that's a little feedback from different people who've reached out to me.
Yeah, and I think it's all part of a much bigger puzzle as planners. And to Rick's point about the form-based code, yes, let's
Yes.
get out ahead of it. And in my estimation, we might definitely want to look at the Winthrop School, but we might want to look farther afield as well, because the MBTA communities will have an effect throughout the town, not just on the Winthrop School. I mean, they'll have a target on the Winthrop School, but I think that
Is anybody give me a quick explanation for why Winthrop was cut and not Cutler? It's Winthrop is sort of a almost it's a centerpiece in the town. It's very convenient.
It's real easy. It's town-owned property, and the town gets no rent from the school district, and it gets no taxes from that piece of property.
But that's also true of the Cutler School.
That's true, except it's 14 acres in the downtown, and the Cutler is farther out. So it's prime real estate right on a state highway.
So it's not that the school board is saying Cutler's a far better school than Winthrop.
No,
Hold on. It's that the two towns are saying, gee, if we close Winthrop, we can make a little money, as opposed to closing Cutler, we don't make any money.
Well, isn't there a?
This is about, what I'm trying to sense is this about
I think
the alternative use and money-making, as opposed to which of the two schools is actually best for the education system?
Well, I think the Cutler is owned actually by the regional school district, so that's number one. Number two is the school committee, talking to the chair, recognizes that the Winthrop school site is too valuable to, and politically, they don't want to have that battle because the town wants it back. The town wants to get revenue from that piece of property, and we're paying for.
Rick, I think that might be a little
for it.
premature to say the town. I think there's officials in the town. I don't think you
point,
get the
Patrick.
support from the town.
Okay, well, that's quite true, but
I'm really in Bill's court on this one. And I think the board needs to talk about, I think that it's being discussed as a foregone conclusion that we're going to be writing and rezoning a bylaw to allow for form-based code to be applied to that site. And I would like the opportunity to come up with a lot of examples and explanations, reasons why we may not want to consider doing that. And spending our
of the
time
same
working on
opinion.
something
I wish the
that I
school board
don't
would
think the
stick to
town
education.
supports.
So, no, it's really very simple. And whether you want to, the town, I mean by the FinCom, the Select Board, certainly the Hamilton Development Corporation, everybody wants that piece of property back as a revenue-generating piece of property. It's very simple. We pay for the schools. We don't get any money from the schools for leasing the property.
Revenue are they going to get from that property? They're going to sell it
Developing
off. They're going to
doing
sell it
the
off
same-
and get a one-time amount of money.
That's the idea. The town is not going to develop it. The whole point of doing a form-based code is the same thing we're doing at Gordon Theological Seminary.
How much money are we looking? A couple $1 million maybe for how many acres? 50, 70 acres? How many acres, Patrick?
It's, I believe, 14 acres.
14 acres. So we're looking at a couple $1 million maybe, given all the limits. And I mean, that's a tiny blip
Yeah.
and that's one time in the annual budget of the school district. This looks like a little
Okay,
penny wise and pound foolish here.
Bill, I mean, it's not just, the fact that we would get a one-time benefit from the sale, but depending on what type of development happened there, you might
get
have
tax
commercial, residential, and you would have ongoing revenue. And the thing with a form-based code is it can lead to a predictable.
Right, that's another example of believing that the problem with Hamilton's, downtown retail, center is that it's not big enough. Whereas the alternative view is that we're stuck between Ipswich and North Beverly, which have,
okay. So, Bill, what would you do with 14 acres at Winthrop? What do you want to do with it? It's going to be
Might leave it
vacated.
as a school and develop, Cutler is in the middle of a nice residential area, put residential out there.
Oh, yeah, and Marnie's going to really love that idea. That's not going to happen, Bill.
It's a.
No, I'm not going to have this.
I think we are all vastly overestimating the retail potential and the value
Talking
of
retail,
that
you're
land. jumping
to all these conclusions.
Commercial.
Okay, let's not argue, let's
real-
hear from
I'm
Abel.
just raising it
Real
as an
value.
issue.
Well, we like vibrant discussion.
Right,
here.
right.
Let's hear from Abel.
Yeah, it's more than just 14 acres. I think it's going to be a cornerstone to the downtown development to a whole different state. Not that we're going to go completely urban, but this could be really the impetus to look at the whole downtown area and arrange it and organize it and build it out in a way that's going to last, hundreds of years, I think, in terms of how it can all happen. It is a central piece to the whole downtown development. I think, as Rick pointed out, it is too valuable, in my opinion, a spot for a school when there's such a need for other things on that site. I think for a lot of reasons, the Cutler site is a much better place to actually look at. Both are going to get rebuilt in any case. Either, whatever happens, going to be a new building. And I think Cutler probably has more going for it, as a good construction site. I think the key to whether this is going to be a good deal is how much the town is going to be willing to look at its whole downtown area beyond the 14 acres. I know I've mentioned this before, but that's going to be the key. If you just look at the 14 acres, I don't think it's a good trade-off. But I think if you do look at it and do a study on the whole downtown area, how it could be developed over time, and nothing gets retroactive, no current business owner there is going to be harmed in any way by this until they get to want to renovate their property in a significant way. Then the planning board will be looking for compliance with the code, at that stage. So I think, I like the idea of being proactive on this. I started looking at an RFP, putting together some language for that to review by the planning board, and using maybe the master plan as a model, not to get the same results as the master plan, but because it's probably a town document that, there are a lot of legal things in there that need to be satisfied. So I thought it would be a good one to use, and then just fill in the scope of work, fill in the things specific to preparing a form-based code. Because, the scope of the work in the code is, you do an existing conditions analysis and inventory, then there's the visioning process again, coming up with a regulating plan and zones in the whole downtown area, which is roughly 60 acres if you were to include from Winthrop School down to the Wenham line and up to Willow Street. It's about 60. And it is. It includes Patton Park, which I would throw in there too, because that's a critical downtown piece of work. And I think it should be considered in any kind of analysis in the downtown area. Do that study and then come up with the standards, similar to what we did, but we would not be doing it this time. We would not be doing any of the design work on this. This would be done by professional planners and do it in a way that really, in conjunction with the town, I think it's a tremendous opportunity for.
Yeah, it's coming. So so we need to come up with a dollar amount, because the select board's already talking 150,000. I don't know if that's enough. I'm looking at this, I understand why you'd want to do the whole downtown. I'm looking at this as a pilot, is to get the population of Hamilton to understand what form-based code is and how it can be applied to a piece of property that's going to be a piece of property. And we have to do that because when that site becomes available, everybody's going to go, well, what's going to happen there? Certainly all the abutters, and certainly people on the planning board and the FinCom and the select board and all the abutters and interested parties are going to say, well, what's happening there? And we don't have an answer other than single-family, housing on quarter-acre lots.
Well, what I will say to you is that if you were to design the 14 acres, come up with a plan for 14 acres, or come up with a plan for 60 acres, you're going to develop the Winthrop site very differently in one scenario versus the other. So if you're just going to focus on a 14 acre, you're really shortchanging the community.
I'd like to interject to do both and instead of either or. How about that? Both and. So
But, oh, go ahead, sorry, Jonathan.
there are ways to do a pilot project, not overwhelm the town, not overwhelm the budget with a consultant, where you can look at the 60 acres, but then develop the code for the 14. So the point here is, instead of just looking at the 14, evaluating the 14, looking at it only in its immediate context, and then developing the form-based code, there's a way to look at the 60, look at its total context, because you have the opportunity to not do the form-based code for the whole thing, but look at the whole downtown as a cohesive package.
That's fine.
Because you have the opportunity at the Winthrop School intersection to create actually a cohesive civic center, as well as a vibrant mixed-use residential and commercial development with a strong civic center and a strong sense of place of arriving in Hamilton, and then tie the two. You basically have two disconnected zones, and there's ways to tie those together. You don't need to write the whole form-based code for the entire 60 acres, but you need to start by considering the 60 and then write it for the 14. So it's both and, not either or.
To your point, it's like a sequential process.
Yes,
Within
yes,
the
both and, not either or.
Start with,
No, that's fine, that's fine.
So you're both right,
So,
and the answer is
So
that
my
you don't look at it
question
in
then
isolation.
becomes, that's fine. My question then becomes a budget question, because the wheels are grinding and we need to make sure that the dollar amount that we are asking for is sufficient to cover that vision
Yes.
that you just
Yes.
described.
And I think the board is teed up and ready to roll as soon as we get a couple things behind us.
No, no.
Ready to roll
No,
in embracing what you're talking about.
No, I know the board is. The select board is already moving on this. They are building an internal consensus and the Hamilton Development Corporation is pushing this for obvious reasons. And the number floating around is $150,000. So if this is a $200,000 effort for the grand scheme of 60 acres, we need to have a number that's realistic so that we don't go, well, we'd like to do 60, but we can't afford it.
Well, I think
Well, there are
that,
different ways to approach it through the RFP, and one is you could reverse it. You could say for $150,000.
What can you do?
What can you do? And you're going to be looking at responses from a number of folks. And I'd go as wide a net as you can do it. And
I'm just
saying, yeah, but I get what you're saying, and I agree with you a little bit on the either or, but but I think well, if we draft the RFP, we can then figure out what is the best way. At some point, we have to ask the consultants. I mean, if you do a broad net and you get some responses, you maybe narrow it down to 5, so you can do a personal interview of 5 firms or teams who would come in and do the work. You could actually stipulate the amount of money and those only interested in doing it for that amount. Or they may come back with a response saying, we can do this, this, and this for that amount. But maybe cutting back with not covering the whole town with a form-based code could get you to that point. I think you're in the range there, but it's getting the right consultants.
Right.
And I don't want to under-resource an effort,
Yes.
so that if you're going to undertake it,
Yeah.
you do it right.
yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And what you could do is, if you write the RFP in the right way and set the process up correctly, you would start to get feedback from the consultants, and they would actually guide you as to how to sequence it so that you're not shutting the door accidentally on the bigger picture, but you're doing it in the right sequence and using the money wisely.
Okay.
You know, and in a way that's self-evident to the select board and, you know, whoever's putting the funding together. So it's not just, you know, we have to convince people. It would become self-evident.
Okay.
And the importance is getting a multidisciplinary team in here, so it's not just an architect,
God forbid.
I know, doing a design, but, or engineer. But it's somebody who knows economics, somebody who knows,
Yeah.
you know, engineering, of course, and, you know, traffic
And
study.
political process and
I
public
think I just like that. So it almost sounds, I'm only just concerned that we're going to go spend a ton of money and go down a road and a lot of effort to, and I'm okay with, like, I would support doing the study. I would support applying the 60 acres to the study, but not with the end goal in mind. Like, don't start with the answer to the question and assess that, you know, don't have the Winthrop School development be part of, like, let the conclusion come about the process. I wouldn't say, here's the Winthrop School, let's develop it. But, you know, the town is good, the town, the people, the residents in the town who go to these schools, who have children in these schools, are gonna have a very strong, and you can be frustrated with them, but this is an effort that's gonna happen. People are gonna find out we spent $200,000 in an effort that gets killed in a town meeting or whatever it ends up being. But I would just think we should maybe have a more proactive approach to entering into the process before spending all the resources and effort in doing
So we
it.
can spend $15 million on turf fields.
Well, yeah.
Well, that was the town voted
So-
that. The town voted to approve that. So that's excellent. If the town votes to approve something and we apply money towards it.
Can I do
that's-
I want to
that's
do a
good.
both and again. Here we go.
So,
Okay, so let me just finish. So I agree with your point, Pat, strongly. And again, as you engage the consultants, if we engage the right consultants, they would not start with the foregone conclusion of that Winthrop School is the first thing, or how you would do it, or what you would do with it. They would be looking first at the big picture. Step one, big picture. Step two, Winthrop School.
Right.
And I'm saying that because I didn't lead with that before, because there's no sense arguing about it right now. If you do the process right, the story will unfold, and it will be a story that makes sense for the whole town, not for one individual's or one group's agenda. So,
May I
and the
ask-
goal was to not get into a argument about Winthrop School and what it is and what it isn't and what it can be, but again, to start with the bigger picture.
Patrick, is that 14 acres close enough to be within the MBTA?
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
Okay, I didn't know.
that's the whole point, is if you don't offer something more attractive to potential developers when that site does become available, because the Mass School Building Authority has already funded, and the town voted the funds to do with the feasibility study, and it's going to be done shortly, and there's going to be recommendation as to where they want the new school to go. So it's not pie in the sky. It's already built in, and the ship sailed. So that piece of property is coming available. So we need, that's why I'm saying we need to be proactive here, is to jump on this. So while the MBTA, we're working towards it, we're doing a good faith effort, is we're saying, hey guys, and actually will work to our benefit. We can either have this and no say as to what happens, or we can plan for the future and determine what it looks like and what our town looks like going forward. So I think that's the actually thoughtful,
Right.
careful planning approach that makes the most sense given what we know is happening.
And I agree with you 100%. And with these consultants, they generally have meetings and get public input. And I would imagine that there will be an emphasis on keeping mature trees and trying to protect open space for the benefit of anyone living there, and trying to make this something that's not just a huge block
Right.
of apartment buildings that would be ghastly and completely out of character with the rest of the downtown. So, you know, looking at
You
it,
don't want 1,100 housing units? Doesn't that represent, there's only 2,600 in the town? So that represents a 40,
What does it say? We have
40%, 40% expansion in the housing,
Yeah.
in the housing of, in the town.
you know, I can't wait to have John Witten come before us, but when you put it in those terms, to actually increase our population by that much and make it a
crazy.
mandate, it almost seems to be an unconstitutional taking of our town. Don't
It's a
hold me to-
25% increase. So they currently say we have, housing units are 2925, and if we have to add 731, that's 25% increase in our town.
Yeah, except
But if you
we
had
have
a
to add
bigger town,
Wenhams, we have to add Wenhams in it because
well, it's
that's going to
practically
have
on
an,
top, I know.
the impact is going to be in Hamilton.
I'm just saying though,
It'll
even
be in
if you don't
Wenham.
include it, it's still 25%, which is huge. Because other towns, it was 10%, it was the greater of 10% or 750. And then some towns that were really small got to peel away and not be 750, but 750 was what was expected of every town.
And that's really, to Patrick's point, it's almost like a number from someone who lives in a suburb of Boston.
Okay, so I was looking at my other
Not a little
note.
town.
Out of 3 million people in the 103 communities, they surveyed and got input from 2,000 people. That's what this was all based on, the input from 2,000 people out of a 3 million population. Anyways, that was a little tidbit of information I got in there. I was like, that's probably not a great sample.
Okay, let's just think though, next steps, Rick. You know, let's move forward with this form-based code. What are our next steps? We put a RFP together, we have a joint meeting with the FinCom and the Select Board to talk about it and get some ideas on the table.
Yeah, I think all of those would be good, because I believe the Select Board is teed up and is supportive of this, because they buy into this, that it just can't be nothing. You can't just vacate it and then suddenly go, oh, well, we better figure out what's going there. Yeah.
There couldn't be any joint meeting
probably
before the town meeting, but afterwards.
Yeah, it's not going to show up until next April or May, whenever next town meeting is. Probably, so it's not like we have to do something right now.
No, but
But probably the one thing this board could do is be drafting an RFP, or, or some framework of an RFP, and start selling that idea, so that people, you can talk to various groups and say, hey, here's what we're thinking, and it is in concert with what the Select Board is, where they're headed, because they're just getting this number. I got this number from you.
Yeah.
I've been using this number.
Yeah.
So now they have that number. So they're going, okay, we want to do something with Winthrop. They don't know what that is. They've
Yeah.
actually thinking form-based code. So we have an opportunity to help shape how, we get that appropriation. We like that idea, we support it, but then we get to help shape what that looks like in terms of an RFP, because, Joe Demelowitz is not going to be writing it.
Right.
Patrick may or may not be here at the time when it comes. And he's got a lot on his agenda, and you guys have expertise in doing that. So I think that's a perfect melding of expertise. You
Yeah.
you can start selling that concept.
Well, there
Yeah.
may be an opportunity at town meeting on the 6th. I think the consensus now is that the Browns Hill Overlay District will not be ready for a vote, but it might be ready for a presentation.
Oh, I think we better be doing a presentation.
Yes, I think that all the planning board should all be there speaking with one voice, but I think that because the illustrative plans utilize a form-based approach, it's an opportunity
Right.
to educate the public about how this same planning tool can be used.
Subliminal advertising.
Yes, exactly. So,
I think the concept of the development agreement needs to be something that people are educated on as well.
oh, absolutely, absolutely.
I-
Good point.
Outside of our scope of purview, I doubt there are many people out there that really have a grasp of it, and that's an important element
Right,
in that
right.
presentation,
I
for sure.
think that,
Yeah.
I don't know how much time could be allocated to the whole Gordon Conwell reuse initiative, but I think there's a role for the select board with respect to the development agreement. There's a role for the planning board. Certainly, showing the illustrative plans is going to be really important because that's the form base that has to carry over to the downtown. And then just an explanation of how this bylaw is crafted. And I know that we could probably develop a handout that had something like a flow chart, you know, with the two different options. I mean, obviously, we can't get into the essentially legalese of a zoning bylaw with all the application requirements and this, that, and the other thing. That would fall on deaf ears. But I think that that's the approach we should take, and I think that it really could lead to something really good for the town. And obviously, there's, I mean, if you have some official that's walking around in Hamilton, they can be looking at all sorts of places where you could put buildings, not least of which is in front of the public safety building. So, I mean, there's space that can be used appropriately and space that should be preserved. And some consultant to take a look at it and advise us with a good RFP is an approach well worth pursuing. So, anybody else have any other comments? Any other bylaws we might want to discuss, or should we go on to board business?
At some point, but not now, the GPOD has to be addressed, but not now, because I think it requires hiring a consultant to review it and look at the latest septic technologies and look at the metrics around the GPOD and revisit that. But I don't think that's something that the board can undertake at this point, and I think it does require having a consultant to guide
Oh,
us.
absolutely. I mean, that's very specialized knowledge. I mean, that's, okay, anybody else?
But it does need to be addressed. It just, we don't have the bandwidth to do it right now.
Right. Anything else? I think, Patrick, the only other item on our agenda really was the annual town report.
Yes. The planning board is asked, like all other town boards and departments, to provide an element for the annual town report. We have been asked to update ours for the fiscal year 2023, which, you know, those that think in fiscal terms understand that it started last July and ended this past June 30th. What our mission really is to work through all of the decisions and outcomes that the planning board has made within that time frame. Typically, I put it together, and typically I'm late. And this year, I was resolved to not being late, so I bring this to you early, and I will put together the report in draft form, but I would appreciate some looking over the shoulder if a member or two wouldn't mind.
I would be happy to, and Matt, would you be willing?
Yep.
So Patrick, once you have your draft forwarded to both
Great.
Matt and me, and we'll take a look at
Great.
it, and I
Very
think
good.
it should be
Patrick,
turned around
is this a
quickly.
draft for '23?
No, this was last year.
This is the prior year?
This was
okay,
last
okay,
year.
okay.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the things span both years.
We had some bleed over.
Spillover.
Okay. Anybody have anything to add?
Just to underscore, we're scheduling the public hearing for the 17th
Right,
of October.
right.
Okay.
I also see an item in Q&A.
Oh,
Patrick, do you have control over that?
Say again?
There's an item in under the Q&A.
It's a comment made about a previous board member's comment. It just says, "Wow, Rick just alluded to Cutler not being developed because Marnie lives close to it. She wouldn't like that. This is what's wrong with the planning board personal agendas."
Oh, God. That's sad.
that was really made in jest, wasn't it?
Of course it was. I would suggest the listener listen to the tone and the reaction of the people. It was made in jest, and it has nothing to do with personalities on the board.
Nothing whatsoever. And I don't actually live next to the Cutler School in any event, so it was clearly in jest. Remember, we're volunteers and we work hard, but we also like to have fun once in a while, so humor greases a lot of wheels, so. Anyhow, I think we've reached the end of the road here. Not a bad time
Rope or
for a motion to adjourn.
2 hours. I make a motion, we adjourn?
Second.
Roll call vote. Pat Norton,
I
Jonathan Poor,
Jonathan Poor, aye.
Bill Wheaton,
Bill Wheaton, aye.
Emil Dahlquist,
Emil Dahlquist, aye.
Beth Herr,
Aye.
Rick Mitchell,
Aye.
and Marnie Crouch, aye.